Good afternoon. This is Pam Oden, and I think we're in like week 6 of COVID-19, and um, I've been kind of pulling back into my resources, looking at some instructors that I studied with years ago. In 2009, I went to Cheap Joe's art seminar with Gerald Brummer, and I've always loved him because of his focus on design. And in my watercolor classes at the Charles Taylor, I introduced my students to the Gerald Brummer design formats. And often for florals, I'll use his radial design. Sometimes for landscapes, especially water scenes, we'll use the S-curve entry. And then for landscapes with mountains and hills, we will use of wedges in design format. So Gerald Brummer's been an inspiring teacher to me, and so wanting to try some new things during COVID-19, I pulled out this DVD I got of his about making stained paper and creating collages from the paper. He is famous for his Italian hillside creations. Let's see. Those are right here. So when my daughter and I went to Italy with her school 10 years ago, I had taken a couple of photos from the tour bus window of Italian hillside communities, and I was able to print those out. And so I decided Easter weekend I would sit out in the backyard and using some golden fluid acrylics and then some Spectra art tissue paper, I would make collage papers. So Spectra art tissue looks like just regular gift wrapping tissue paper, but it's much stronger and it's designed for art processes. So I mixed up a solution of the fluid acrylics with water, thinned it down, took a large 2-inch wide watercolor brush and just painted my foam core board and then pressed the tissue paper down so it would absorb the color of the acrylic. And I was able to make all these gorgeous, gorgeous colors, reds and oranges and browns, greens, blues. I was kind of knowing I wanted to do a hillside town, so I focused on colors that maybe I could use for that project. So then I chose my photo, and on a piece of 300-pound paper, I drew my Italian hillside scene in, and this is a horizontal format with the city up on the hill. And then you can see that I have elongated the line extending from the edge of the building down into the foreground. I love it when Brummer does that with his designs. He brings, he has an emphasis on shape and line, and so you can follow his line down throughout his pieces. So after I got my town drawn, then I began to apply using matte medium the collage paper. And as you can see, my first step was to do the sky in cobalt blues and ceruleans, and then I've got the start of the trees here in the background going too. Next step was to go ahead and work on the rocky foreground, and you can tell I'm trying to get a dark light pattern going with extended lines, and it feels a little bit like a weaving process because you're thinking dark against light, but you're also thinking about extended lines and how do I move this line from the right side of the page to the left side of the page. Maybe I'm going to continue and start my line with brown, but then I'm going to move over into the the peaches or the reds, and I'm going to extend, I'm going to add some blue collage here to extend the line on down on this side down the hill. And all the while keeping in mind the strong vertical lines from the edge of the building down into the foreground as I'm beginning to build the rocky surface of the collage. And then a step further, I've started to apply collage to the buildings in the background. And so this process was really enjoyable. It took me about 5 days to complete because you have to do it in steps. And then this is my finished product. Very colorful. Maybe it's a little bit rough, you know, and as I'm looking at it 2 weeks after completion, I'm seeing a few things maybe I need to touch up a little bit more. Maybe work to extend some of the lines a little bit further from the left side of the page to the right side of the page. But in essence, I think you can see the strong light and dark verticals as you move across the page. I just really enjoyed this colorful experience. And listening to Brummer's DVDs, I find enthralling because he has such an enthusiasm for his subject. And so now, last weekend, I decided I would try doing another version of his Italian hilltop town, but this time I wanted to do it with making a very complex surface on which to do this Italian hillside. So for this piece, I chose to do a vertical format. I'm almost finished this piece. Have a little more touch up to do on it, and hope you can see it there. Started out with my 300-pound paper. The fun part was that to begin my cruciform design, we started out by tearing pieces of brown grocery bag up. And so those were the first pieces I applied after I did my hillside drawing, was to put patches of brown on the 4 points of that cruciform form. And that helped me to identify what was going to be my darkest value. And then I covered the whole surface with the white washi collage and rice papers. These were purchased papers I got from Cheap Joe's, Jerry's Artorama, probably some from Dick Blick's. If you've been in my class before, we've done watercolor on rice paper collage before. So I used the matte medium, applied the white paper all over my design. And then while the matte medium was still wet, I dropped in some initial color. I used Quinn Gold and kind of encircled around the city. I wanted the hilltop town to serve as a focus, so I wanted that to be a little lighter. And then I painted the Quinn Gold, you know, in these areas surrounding the buildings. After I painted the Quinn Gold, let it dry for a day. Next step in creating this complex surface with fibers and papers, paper bags, collage paper, I took white gesso and I thinned the gesso down and painted a light wash of gesso all over the whole piece, and then let that dry. That helped to lighten some of the patches of the brown paper bags and integrated that in to read cohesively into the scene. After the gesso dried, then I began to paint in my towns with watercolor. And I used some, I mixed a little bit of acrylic ink that I applied with my liner brush. And also I used these barbecue skewers that I found at Food Lion last week. Gerald Brummer uses these in his teaching videos, so I was really tickled to find those on my trip to the grocery store. And then I used some Higgins waterproof India ink with my skewer. And that enabled me to get some of the rich line work here in my Italian hillside scene. I loved being able to rotate the skewer to get thick line here. And you can see as we come down into the foreground that my floral shapes enlarge as we come into the foreground. I'm hoping that my use of line and my use of shape help to convey a strong sense of design to this hilltop scene. So these are a couple of the experiments that I've been doing during coronavirus quarantine. I tried also some Dick Blick toned paper, and my iris bloomed last week, so I took some photographs of my iris, and on the blue toned paper I drew an iris with the India ink and my wooden skewer on toned blue paper, and then on white paper, and this is Bockingford 140 tinted paper. You can get it at Dick Blick. And then after you do your line drawing with India ink, you just simply splash watercolor on. Just really loved the time this week. My focus has been on design and on experimenting with the ink and using this skewer. So these are a couple of things that I've been working on during coronavirus. I love to use the opportunity where you feel like you need to stretch yourself a little bit to try something different and push the limit, either with color or design. You know, again with the texture, like I did with the washi paper and the gesso this week. So I hope maybe this will inspire you to try some mixed media projects with watercolor and ink on gessoed texture surfaces. Thank you. Bye.